Right now, for discussion on this issue, I'm now joined live by Khaled Dawoud, a political analyst at Al Ahram in Cairo, as well as Jeenah from Johannesburg's Afro-Middle East Center. Gentlemen, welcome to Africa Live. Khaled, we'll begin with you in Cairo. Now, Egypt's been dealing with the threat of militants mostly in the Sinai region. Just how big a threat is being posed by regional as well as local branches of the Islamic State?
Well, definitely it's a very big threat, and there are obviously a reasonable number of suspected militants who are affiliated to the Islamic State in Iraq, and they have announced, I think a few months ago, that they are part of this Islamic State that's headed by Mr. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Iraq. And of course, they have obviously the problem has always been there, but due to the state of disintegration that several other Arab countries are in right now, namely Syria and Iraq and Libya, this problem even became much worse. In Egypt, after the January 25th revolution, there was a kind of deterioration in security. This allowed the smuggling of tremendous amount of weapons from Libya, from Sudan, from Gaza, into Sinai Peninsula to launch a war against the Egyptian army. Obviously, the war is a very difficult one. After June 30 and the removal, June 30-13, and the removal of former Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi, we saw a sharp increase in the activities of the militants in Sinai, first under the name of Bayt al-Maqdis, and after that, as I said, they joined the Islamic State. And despite the fact that the Egyptian army has been launching a practical war against these groups in Sinai over a year and a half, they still have the capability, and they manage to launch major attacks in which at least 30 people were killed in the attack we saw only a few weeks ago against the Egyptian army. So they are a major threat, and I think they will continue to be a major threat for some time to come.
Now, Egypt, of course, has concerns around developments in Libya. If we look a little closer at Egypt's interests there, President Fattah al-Sisi has said that there is speculation that he could possibly deploy forces, and he has already ordered that Egyptians living there be evacuated. Now, should Egypt deploy its forces there, or what kind of response do you think would be appropriate? Khaled.
I don't think that Egypt has the capability to launch a major military offensive against Libya. Libya is a huge country, and the problem, of course, that the country is disintegrated, but nevertheless, in this state of chaos, and obviously that's the experience. When a country, the central government disintegrates, there is no a central army even as well, or police or security. These kinds of groups, they managed to thrive, and they managed to get weapons, plus the weapons that existed in Libya, and they took it over from the former regime of Mr. Gaddafi. But again, you know, if Egypt decided to carry out any military operations within Libya, I think it will be surgical operations against certain targets using the Air Force, but not necessarily at all using ground troops, because already the Egyptian army is stretched very thin, whether in Sinai or along the border with Libya or within Egypt itself. Unfortunately, since the removal of former President Morsi, we haven't seen almost a single day of stability. Even in the past few weeks, there has been a sharp increase locally in attacks by suspected Muslim Brotherhood members, bombs here and there, burning public buses, burning electricity grids. So I don't think that the Egyptian army will do something by its own, a major offensive against Libya. But of course, there is a lot of talk of international coordination. The existence of the Daesh or the Islamic State in Libya, basically over vast amounts of territory, does not represent a threat to Egypt alone. It represents a major threat to Africa and to Europe as well. And I know that several African countries who are bordering with Libya are also considering similar steps due to the spread of the threat in Libya to all neighboring countries. So I mean, of course, the public opinion here are very angry. The brutal death, expected brutal death of more than 20 Coptic Christians is definitely causing a fury here in Egypt. But I think that the Egyptian government, if it acted, it will be limited action, and probably they prefer rather a major international coordinated effort in this.
All right, Khaled, we'll return to you in just a moment. Let's move to Jeenah in Johannesburg. Now this security threat posed by ISIL extremists in the Middle East is now, of course, being felt on the African continent. What parallels are you drawing from the two regions which make them fertile grounds for ISIL to operate?
Well, clearly what makes it fertile ground is whether you look at Syria or Iraq in the Middle East or Libya, is the state of instability and disintegration of the state. In fact, certainly in Libya, one can't say that a state exists. In Iraq, in the northern parts where ISIS took hold, similar kind of situation, lots of discontent with the central state, and a situation where the central state didn't have full control, and similarly with the areas in Syria. So that's the kind of area where ISIS is able best to thrive, but also that they target areas where they can, unlike, for example, their predecessor, Al-Qaeda, ISIS' objective is to take and to hold territory. And so the northern part of Iraq, parts of Syria, parts of Libya, they believe that they can do this. I'm not sure that they actually will be able to in Libya, but that's their objective.
Now, previously, the Egyptian foreign minister had said that the interconnected nature of these organizations needs to be recognized. How should African governments tackle this issue of ISIL?
I think firstly we need to be careful about that kind of statement. The notion that any organization that commits terror acts is part of one network, I think is problematic, because it's misdiagnosing the problem. And when you misdiagnose the problem, then the solution also becomes not very clear. I think there are a number of organizations operating on the continent, whether you talk about the Lord's Resistance Army or Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram, that engage in terrorist acts, but this doesn't mean that necessarily they're all linked to each other. So in different contexts, they need to be dealt with differently. In some contexts, it's a matter of addressing the needs of people, socio-economic needs of people, that will then pull the rug out from under these militant groups. And this is certainly the case in northern Nigeria, for example. In Libya, if there were a political solution that brought stability to that country, I think that the ISIS group there would be isolated very quickly from the broader Libyan population. So in different contexts, I think these groups need to be looked at differently, look at what allows them to thrive, what they're seeking to gain, and how they might be isolated within their communities.
Right, Khaled, now Naeem touched on the issue of the socio-economic conditions that influence radicalization. How is that situation in Egypt? How do you regard it, especially related to the youth, them being fueled towards radicalization, and how it's attracting them to jihadist causes?
Well, of course, that's certainly a factor that deteriorating socioeconomic conditions plays in the hands of terrorist organizations or extremist organizations that use religion as a tool. But if I might comment on what my colleague from South Africa said, yes, indeed, each group and organization has its own local aspects, but unfortunately we now live in a world whereby these militants, because they agree on the same ideology, whether the establishment of an Islamic Khilafah or a strict Islamic state, they do exchange experiences. I think the entire story started in Afghanistan, but later became even much worse in Iraq after the US invasion in 2003, and we saw the existence of militias, people coming from all over the world. So even in Sinai, when we speak about Sinai, you found people from Yemen, from Saudi Arabia, even from Chechnya, sometimes from Mali, all gathering in the place where they think that this is the right place for them to fight what they see as an international struggle on behalf of Islam, which is of course a very wrong vision. But what we tell the Egyptian government here, whether in Sinai or in the mainland itself, is that they have to win the local population. If there is this serious problem of terrorism, the civilians in those areas should not pay the price. Unfortunately, the Egyptian police have a very negative history in this respect. Whenever a terrorist operation takes place, there are arbitrary arrests, there might be some wrong killings, and of course this makes the situation worse. So in any war like this, like the one that exists in Sinai, we either have to coordinate with the local population who are influenced and affected by this war. We saw the militants in Sinai, they even kill local residents, they chop their heads off if they suspect that they cooperate with the police. So we have to win the local population, and we have to offer an alternative. It's not only security that's going to solve this problem, there has to be also democracy and respect of human rights and respect of social and economic rights.
Now, Naeem, with these militant groups looking at ISIL specifically, is it a case of more Africans being recruited for jihadist missions in Syria and Iraq? We see up to 3,000 Tunisians, for example, moving towards that region. Or is ISIS getting more involved in terror activities on the African continent, perhaps with local groups pledging allegiance?
No, their objective, as I said earlier on, is essentially around the issue of territory. So they want to capture and they want to hold territory and create a state on that territory. And the main kind of area that they've identified is the area that spans across Iraq and Syria. So they're not really interested in sending their people out to conduct operations in other parts of the world, on the African continent or elsewhere, but actually the modus operandi is to attract people inwards into their so-called state. And build that state and hold that territory. So yes, the figures you gave, between 2,000 and 3,000 Tunisians that have gone, a few people from other African countries as well. Sub-Saharan Africa, not that many, perhaps some from Somalia, but not much in the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. But I don't think that ISIS objective really is to create groups in various parts on the African continent and conduct operations there. They would rather recruit from Africa into their area.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much for speaking there to Naeem Jeenah from the Afro-Middle East Center, as well as Khaled Dawoud, a political analyst at Al Ahram in Cairo. Thanks very much.